The latest on this morning, there are still more questions than answers following the apparent suicide of wealthy sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Guards doing rounds on Saturday morning found him dead in his jail cell in Lower Manhattan. That was at around 6:30 a.m. Multiple people briefed on the investigation have told NBC News that checks on inmates are supposed to take place every 30 minutes or so. But there are questions if there was a delay the night that Epstein died. According to NBC News, Epstein was not on suicide watch at the time of his death, even though he was found unconscious in his cell with marks around his neck just 3 weeks ago. Sources tell NBC that Epstein underwent a psychiatric evaluation and they cleared him from suicide watch on or around July the 29th. Officials tell the New York Times that because of the incident 3 weeks ago, Epstein was supposed to have another inmate in his cell. But the jail had recently transferred his cellmate and allowed Epstein to be housed alone, a decision that actually violates the jail's procedures. Meanwhile, the president for the local union for staffers told the Washington Post that the two corrections officers assigned to watch the special unit in the detention center where Epstein was being housed were working overtime, one forced to do so by management, the other for his fourth or fifth consecutive day. Joe, so it looks like, there are issues in the jail as well, but of course a lot of questions about why there were so many coincidences that led to him being left alone.
So many coincidences, and Stephanie Gosk, they're acting as if when they talk about, oh, well, we're understaffed and, well, they're supposed to see him every 30 minutes. They're acting as if this prisoner is just one of many prisoners and not somebody who actually has information on presidents, on princes, on governors, on senators, on Harvard law professors. I mean, there are so many powerful people who may have done just extraordinarily terrible things that it seems that the Justice Department had a special need, a special interest in keeping this man safe, so finally justice delayed could be justice served. But that's, of course, not going to happen. So tell us what you've learned about exactly how this came about.
Sure, Joe. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that Jeffrey Epstein was the most high-profile inmate in federal custody at the time. And it's important to drill down on that timeline. If you consider the fact that he was found in his jail cell injured on July 25th, and that he was, according to our sources, put on suicide watch. We're then told that by July 29th, he was taken off of suicide watch. And because of conversations that I've had with particularly one former federal warden at a number of prisons, including the sister facility in Brooklyn, the only way that happens, to be taken off of suicide watch, would be if a psychologist or psychiatrist determined and spoke with a program coordinator at the facility, and they decided that he should come off that watch. It would have had to have been a decision made by executives there at the prison. And this former official that I spoke to said, obviously, with an inmate like Jeffrey Epstein, you are going to proceed with the utmost caution in everything that you do. Now, on suicide watch, he would have been in a special jumpsuit that would have prevented suicide. He also would have been watched 24/7. That would be eyes on him 24/7. He was taken off. He was then put back in general population. And our understanding is that those half-hour checks they're not specific times. They're arbitrary. So conceivably within an hour, he could have been checked at the beginning of the hour or perhaps checked at the end of the hour. It still would have given him plenty of time to take his own life. So even talking about whether the guards were there or not, even if they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, which remains a question, there still was plenty of time for him to, they say, hang himself in his cell. Joe?
Yeah, let's bring in right now State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Varenberg. Dave, how in the world does something like this happen? 30-minute rotations, 1 hour rotations. Here's a guy, first of all, that a lot of people wanted dead. Here's a guy who obviously you would think understood that he had nothing to live for. So he had actually reason to commit suicide, but others had reason to try to get to him and have him killed as well. Isn't this a prisoner that you, as a state attorney, would make sure that prison officials had their eyes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, especially if you were going to get from him evidence involving possibly presidents, past and current, a prince, U.S. senators, governors, Harvard law professors? I mean, this is billionaires. This is outrageous. What would you do in this situation? Would you say, oh, you know what, check him every hour or so?
It is pretty shocking that the most high-profile inmate in the entire world, who had apparently tried to commit suicide 3 weeks prior, was allowed to do so this past Saturday. Now, there are supposed to be cameras in place at the special housing unit where Epstein was held, and hopefully those cameras are working and operational and can tell us a lot. If they were not, then even I would start to succumb to some of these theories of foul play or outside influence. But as a prosecutor, I deal with facts, not conspiracies, so I think it's probably still just a suicide by way of multiple layers of human error, where you had overworked individuals who were guarding him, who, because one of them, as was said, had 5 overtime work days in a row, and so that may explain why they didn't check on him every 30 minutes. But it doesn't explain why the facility would have taken his cellmate away, and that's a guard against suicide. And so, to me, there are a lot of unanswered questions, but until we get more facts, until we see the autopsy results and the video, then I'm going to still subscribe to the suicide theory by multiple layers of human error.
Why though, Dave, would you take him off suicide watch 4 days after he tried to commit suicide? Why would any prison take him off suicide watch?
That's a great question. I think you could say that possibly that Epstein and his lawyers wanted off suicide watch, because at that facility, suicide watch can be punitive, where you're not allowed to leave your cell very much. You're forced to wear that suicide smock so you don't hang yourself on your clothes. You don't get eating utensils. You don't even get bed sheets so you don't hang yourself. And so that may explain why they were eager to get off of suicide watch, but it only happened 6 days after his attempt, and it looks like the internal procedures were not followed. This has got to be reviewed, but unfortunately the investigation is going to be led by Attorney General Barr, who doesn't have that much credibility left with the American public, and so anything that they come up with will be viewed skeptically, and so these conspiracy theories will continue to thrive well into the future.
So, Eddie Glaude, you listened to the young women who were abused by this man, who were raped by this man, and for 30 years, they have not been able to have their day in court as charges were brought against this man, and they were not able to have their day in court confronting him, talking about presidents, talking about princes, talking about senators, talking about governors. I keep repeating all of this, talking about Harvard law professors. I keep repeating all of this because it just sends a very clear message that if you're rich and you're powerful in the United States of America, in this case, and you have connections, you're going to be able to avoid having a jury of your own peers. You're going to have, federal officials do a sweetheart deal for you. Then after a newspaper does an extraordinary job, you're finally brought back to justice. And then you're left alone to kill yourself to avoid trial. And again, once again, having to hear, like we saw in the gymnastics case, hear people tell you what you did to them. I'm sorry, this is about two different Americas. How the rich have their own justice system, and everybody else has a completely different system of justice.
Joe, you're absolutely right in that regard. It seems to me not unreasonable for everyday ordinary people to jump to some version of some conspiracy theory, right? Not some wild conspiracy theory, but to just simply draw some inference from the fact that if you're rich, if you're powerful, that somehow you can escape the law, that you're not treated like everyone else. And so I think, just to echo what Mike said earlier, it is important that this process is transparent and it's quick. that people let folk know what happened, because it makes sense that people think that foul play has happened. So the first thing is that we need to be transparent. And the second thing is what you opened with, Joe, at least with me, and that is that there needs to be justice for the victims. That somehow, we need to keep pursuing this on the civil side. That they need to be able to sue the estate. They need to be able to tell their story. Because there's still some folk out there who are caught up in this investigation. So I think transparency, and we need to continue to pursue justice for those young girls, those now women who were victims of what I take to be the monstrous behavior of Epstein.
And despite Epstein's death, Caddy, this criminal investigation that led to the sex trafficking charges are going to continue, right?
Yeah, according to the New York Times, federal prosecutors and FBI agents will turn their attention to people whom his accusers have alleged participated in a scheme that dates back more than a decade and involved the sexual exploitation of dozens of underage girls. That could include a circle of close associates whom accusers have said helped recruit, train and coerce them into catering to Epstein. Manhattan federal prosecutors have not charged or named anyone as a co-conspirator, but in 2007, a non-prosecution agreement between Epstein and federal officials in Florida said that prosecutors would not charge 4 women it identified as potential co-conspirators. The chief federal prosecutor in Manhattan has maintained that it is not bound by the Florida agreement. Lawyers say many of Epstein's accusers can still pursue civil claims against his vast estate, which is said still to be worth more than $500 million, Joe. So that's the kind of legal situation. But it looks like you saying there that the investigation can continue. So maybe still possibly some justice for people involved?
Perhaps. I mean, and Stephanie, some answers that need to be, some questions that need to be answered about some very high-profile people in both parties, and even people outside of politics who, whether they're billionaires or famed law professors, that we need to get the answers to. So tell us, Stephanie, what have you heard is next in this aspect of the case? Where do these investigators go now?
Well, the SDNY has been incredibly tight-lipped in their investigation, if you consider the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and it took everyone by surprise. So they're certainly not giving any real cues on where it's going. But we're taking our cues from some of the other legal things that have been going on right before Jeffrey Epstein, the day before he took his own life, apparently. There was a trove of documents released, nearly 2,000 pages, in a civil case. And to give you a little bit of context, this was Virginia Roberts Giuffre. She accuses Jeffrey Epstein of abusing her as a child. She took out a defamation case against a woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is this British socialite who was very, very close to Jeffrey Epstein. The reason she sued her for defamation is because Ghislaine Maxwell was denying that she recruited girls for sex with Jeffrey Epstein. But as a result of this legal process, this case which was settled in 2017, we got to see some of these documents. Not all of them, and some of them are out of context, but it does give you some insight. Some new names popped up out of these documents, 2 in particular that struck our attention: former U.S. Senator George Mitchell, as well as the former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson. Now, both of those men, the day these documents were released, very, very quickly denied any of the allegations. There were some names in these documents that we had seen before. Prince Andrew in the UK, who has also since denied any of the allegations. And what you see here is the potential, whether it's Ghislaine Maxwell, whether it's other associates of Jeffrey Epstein, potentially facing criminal charges, which would give these victims an opportunity to come forward. And I also want to point out that when we were talking about this incredible non-prosecution agreement that was struck in 2008, one of the extraordinary parts of it was the fact that not only was it a non-prosecution agreement for Jeffrey Epstein, but it was a non-prosecution agreement for his co-conspirators. And that made a lot of people sit up and pay attention. And you have to wonder whether the SDNY is looking to potentially correct that.
Yeah. Dave Ehrenberg, let me ask you, as a prosecutor, what's your next step in a case like this? And can these young women still have justice served?
They won't get complete justice because he'll never be held accountable in a court of law, and some of his secrets will die with him. But you will see more civil suits against him. You're going to see probably the SDNY name more individuals as co-conspirators and maybe bring charges against them criminally. And you have non-criminal investigations that are pending, such as the Inspector General's investigation of the controversial 2007 plea deal. All these things will bring out more facts. All these things will reveal more secrets. So this whole thing is far from over. And if you're one of these co-conspirators who think that you just got away with it because of Epstein's death, well, you also just lost your leverage with federal prosecutors because Epstein's not around to flip on anymore. Epstein's not around to cut a deal on. And if you're looking around for a bigger fish to flip on, then generally the big fish is you because there's no one else around.
Wow.
Okay, so still a lot of questions about what happened, still a lot of questions about what happened next. Coming up on Morning Joe, how the El Paso killer echoed the incendiary words of conservative media stars. The New York Times' Jeremy Peters explores the striking degree of overlap in language like invasion and replacement of Americans. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.